In 2009, James Cameron took audiences somewhere nobody had ever seen before. A blue planet, floating mountains, strange creatures, and a world that somehow felt more alive than anything we'd seen on a movie screen. That movie was Avatar. When Jake Sully first opened his eyes on Pandora, nobody knew just how massive this film was going to become. But Avatar didn't just become a hit, it became a global phenomenon. And suddenly, the actors behind Jake, Neytiri, Quaritch, Grace, and the rest of Pandora were known all over the world. But here's the interesting part. It's been more than 15 years since the original movie. Some of these actors became even bigger stars. Some moved into completely different kinds of roles. Some returned to Pandora again and again. And some quietly built impressive careers away from the franchise. So today, we're going back to Avatar, looking at 10 of the most memorable faces from the original film, and finding out what happened to them after they left Pandora. And trust me, some of these career journeys are very different from what you might expect. Let's start with the man who went from a former Marine to the leader of the Na'vi. 1. Sam Worthington. Jake Sully. Jake Sully wasn't supposed to become a hero. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He was a former Marine who found himself on Pandora because his twin brother had died. And at first, Jake's mission was simple. Gather information, follow orders, go home. Then he met Neytiri, and everything changed. What made Sam Worthington's performer was that Jake wasn't introduced as some perfect action hero. He was confused, he made mistakes, he didn't understand Pandora. And most importantly, he had to earn his place there. By the end, Jake wasn't just visiting Pandora anymore, he had chosen it. And that decision changed the direction of the entire story. But here's the surprising part about Sam Worthington. Before Avatar, he wasn't exactly one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Then suddenly, he was the face of one of the biggest movies ever made. He went on to appear in films such as Clash of the Titans, Terminator Salvation, Man on a Ledge, and several later Avatar movies. And instead of trying to escape Jake completely, Worthington returned to the character. Jake became something much bigger than a single movie role. He became a character Worthington has carried across an entire franchise. And Pandora is still not finished with him. The story continues. But Jake's journey wouldn't have meant much without the woman who changed his entire understanding of the planet, Neytiri. 2. Zoe Saldaña. Neytiri wasn't impressed by Jake. And honestly, who could blame her? He was a complete outsider. He didn't understand her people. He didn't understand the forest. And he certainly didn't understand why Pandora was worth protecting. But Neytiri saw something in him that Jake didn't see in himself. Potential. Zoe Saldaña brought a huge amount of emotion to a character who was completely digital on screen. And that's easy to forget. Audiences weren't watching a traditional live-action performance. They were watching an actress create a character through motion capture and performance work. And somehow, Neytiri felt real. After Avatar, Saldaña's career went into another universe. Literally, she became Gamora in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She also returned as Uhura in the modern Star Trek films. And then, of course, she came back as Neytiri for the Avatar sequels. That means Saldaña ended up becoming one of the very few actors to lead multiple billion-dollar movie franchises. Her career after Avatar became enormous, and she has continued to balance major franchise films with other projects. She's also spoken publicly about wanting to explore more work behind the camera, including directing. So the woman who once stood in the jungle, teaching Jake how to see Pandora, has now reached a point where she can decide what kind of stories she wants to help create. But not everyone in Avatar wanted to save Pandora. Some wanted to destroy it. And nobody represented that better than Colonel Quaritch. 3. Stephen Lang. Colonel Miles Quaritch didn't need Pandora. He didn't respect Pandora. And he definitely didn't respect the Na'vi. He saw the planet as territory, Starsers, something to conquer. Stephen Lang played him with almost zero hesitation. Quaritch was intimidating from the moment he appeared. He didn't need a complicated explanation. You understood him immediately. This was a soldier who believed that strength was the answer to everything. And when Jake turned against him, the conflict became personal. But here's something interesting. Stephen Lang didn't become famous because of Avatar. He already had a long career in film, television, and theater. Avatar simply introduced him to a completely different generation. And then something unusual happened. Even though Quaritch died in the original film, the character came back. The Avatar franchise found a way to bring him into the later story in a completely different form. That gave Lang the chance to revisit one of his most recognizable characters while adding new layers to him. And somehow, after all these years, Quaritch is still one of Pandora's biggest threats. But if Quaritch represented the military side of Avatar, the next character represented the scientific side, Dr. Grace Augustine. 4. Sigourney Weaver, Dr. Grace Augustine Grace. Augustine didn't have time for nonsense. She was intelligent, experienced, and completely fascinated by Pandora. While the military saw resources, Grace saw an ecosystem, a living world, something worth understanding rather than destroying. And Sigourney Weaver was almost perfect for the role. Because by the time Avatar arrived, Weaver was already a science fiction legend. She had spent years associated with one of the most famous sci-fi characters in cinema history, Ellen Ripley, from Alien. So Avatar wasn't really her introduction to science fiction. It was another chapter in a career that had already changed the genre. Her character died in the first Avatar, but because this is Pandora, death doesn't necessarily mean goodbye. Weaver returned to the franchise in a different role, giving her a completely new character to play. That's one of the stranger things about Avatar. Actors can disappear from the story, and somehow return years later as someone else. Outside Avatar, Weaver has continued working across major films and television. And she remains one of those actors whose name instantly carries a certain weight. But not everyone from the original cast had decades of experience. One of them was a much younger actor who became known for a very different kind of movie. 5. Michelle Rodriguez. Trudy Chacon-Trudy wasn't just another pilot. She was one of the few people inside the human operation who genuinely cared about the Na'vi. And when she had to choose between following orders and doing what she believed was right, she chose the dangerous option. Michelle Rodriguez brought a familiar toughness to the character. And if you already knew her from The Fast and the Furious, you probably recognized that energy immediately. But Avatar showed another side of her. Trudy wasn't simply tough. She was loyal. She had a conscience, and when the final battle came, she was willing to risk everything for Pandora. Her career after Avatar stayed incredibly busy. The Fast and Furious franchise remained a major part of it, and she also appeared in projects across action, science fiction, and televisions. So while Trudy's story ended in Avatar, Rodriguez's career certainly didn't. And then we have a character who was almost the complete opposite, a businessman who looked at Pandora and saw one thing: profit. 6. Giovanni Ribisi. Parker Selfridge wasn't interested in the spiritual side of Pandora. He wasn't interested in the Na'vi culture. He wasn't interested in Jake's emotional transformation. He wanted results, and Giovanni Ribisi played him perfectly. Selfridge wasn't a soldier. He didn't need to personally fight anyone. He had something else: authority, money, and the ability to make decisions that affected an entire world. That made him dangerous in a completely different way. But Giovanni Ribisi's career goes far beyond Avatar. He had already been acting for years, with roles in films such as Saving Private Ryan, Gone in 60 Seconds, and Lost in Translation. He's also known for television work, including Sneaky Pete. So once again, Avatar wasn't the beginning of an actor's career. It was simply one of the biggest chapters, and while Selfridge was trying to control Pandora from an office, another character was actually trying to understand it: Norm Spellman. 7. Joel David Moore. Norm Spellman was the kind of scientist you could actually imagine spending months in a jungle with. He was curious, awkward, passionate, and completely fascinated by Pandora. Unlike Jake, he didn't arrive with the idea of becoming a warrior. He arrived because he wanted to learn. Joel David Moore gave Norm a little bit of humor without turning him into a joke. And that balance made the character memorable. After Avatar, Moore continued acting and also expanded into directing and producing. He's worked in television and film and taken on roles far removed from Pandora. That's something worth remembering when watching older movies. Actors don't always become famous in the same way their biggest character does. Sometimes the audience remembers the character, while the actor quietly moves behind the camera and builds another career. And then we reach one of the most important voices of Pandora, Moat. 8. CCH Pounder. Moat wasn't just Neytiri's mother. She was one of the spiritual leaders of the Na'vi. She understood Pandora in a way Jake could barely begin to comprehend. And CCH Pounder gave the character a sense of authority without needing to overplay it. Pounder already had a long and respected career before Avatar. She had worked extensively in film and television, with major roles in projects such as The Shield, NCIS, New Orleans, and numerous other productions. So Avatar was another impressive entry in a career that had already lasted decades. Her voice and presence gave Moat a sense of importance, even when she wasn't saying much. You felt that she understood more than everyone around her. And that's what made Pandora feel like a real culture, rather than just a fantasy world. But there was another warrior who was even more directly connected to Neytiri, Ncuti. 9. Laz Alonso. Ncuti had every reason to hate Jake. From his point of view, this strange human had entered his world, taken Neytiri's attention, and somehow become involved with his people. Ncuti was proud, protective, and completely committed to the Omaticaya. Laz Alonso gave the character a powerful physical presence, even though much of the performance was created through motion capture. Before and after Avatar, Alonso continued building a strong career across film and television. He's appeared in major projects including Fast and Furious, Detroit, The Boys, and other productions. And that's another interesting connection between the Avatar cast. Several of them ended up becoming recognizable in completely different franchises. So if someone tells you, "I know that guy from somewhere," there's a good chance they actually do. But there was one final member of our original Avatar journey, a scientist who represented the possibility of cooperation between humans and the Na'vi, Dr. Max Patel. 10. Dileep Rao. Dr. Max Patel. Max Patel wasn't the loudest character in Avatar. He didn't have Jake's transformation. He didn't have Neytiri's warrior status. He wasn't Quaritch's enemy, but he was important. He represented the people who came to Pandora to understand it, rather than exploit it. Dileep Rao brought a quiet intelligence to the role. And while Avatar became one of the biggest films in cinema history, Rao continued working across film and television rather than becoming locked into one franchise. He's appeared in projects such as Inception, Drag Me to Hell, and other productions. And that's actually one of the most interesting things about the original Avatar cast. Some became huge franchise stars. Some became familiar faces across television. Some returned to Pandora. And others simply continued building their careers one role at a time. Thought when Avatar came out in 2009, nobody knew what Pandora would become. The movie looked different. It sounded different. It felt different. And the technology changed the way audiences thought about visual effects. But underneath all of that technology was something much simpler. A story about a man who entered another world and realized that the world he came from might have been the one that was wrong. More than 15 years later, the actors who helped create that story have gone in completely different directions. Sam Worthington stayed with Jake. Zoe Saldaña became one of Hollywood's biggest franchise stars. Stephen Lang somehow brought Quaritch back. Sigourney Weaver returned to Pandora in a completely unexpected way. Michelle Rodriguez kept dominating action roles. Giovanni Ribisi continued his long career. And the rest of the cast kept moving forward as well. Meanwhile, Avatar itself didn't stay in 2009. Pandora kept expanding. And for the original cast, that meant something unusual. Their then versus now story isn't simply about leaving the old movie behind. For some of them, they're still living in that world. And that's what makes Avatar different. The story changed. The actors changed. But Pandora never really disappeared. So after all these years, which Avatar character do you remember the most? Jake? Neytiri? Quaritch? Grace? Or maybe one of the characters who didn't get nearly enough screen time? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy these journeys through legendary movies and the actors behind them, subscribe to the channel, because there are a lot more iconic stories waiting for us. Until the next one, see you back on Pandora.